1 second. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to get us started today. We have 2 topics for today's class. The first one is research performance progress reports, and the acronym for that is RPPR. And we'll do a break, and then we'll go into project tracking and time management. And one thing that I want to just bring to mind is that this session is going to focus on NIH progress reports, but as you all, I'm sure, are very aware, there's so many different funders. They all have different progress reports to report on how a grant is going and the grant financials and that sort of thing. So we're just going to focus on NIH progress reports today. But I found that a lot of the skills needed to put together an NIH progress report, you can reutilize for any other types of progress reports. And I've also found NIH and government funding progress reports are the most complex. I've had a few private, nonprofit grants, and their progress reports seem to be a little bit less detailed. And we will kick off with the question. Have you or your organization submitted an NIH RPPR? Yes, as the prime awardee, yes, as a subcontract, no, or I don't know. And hopefully that launched for you. All right, we're getting some responses. Give it 30 more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. And here were our responses. So 2 people said they had submitted an RPPR as the prime awardee. That's awesome. And 3 people said as a subcontract. 1 person said no, they haven't. And then most of you guys said, I don't know. And that's totally fine. If you have a grant, an NIH grant with us at Vanderbilt or with somebody else, then the answer is most likely yes, you have helped with an RPPR. You just may have not realized it. Okay. So there are 3 types of RPPRs. The first one is an annual RPPR. So that's what you submit every year for an NIH grant. And it's you submit it before the start of the next budget period. And it's used to describe a grant's scientific progress, identify significant changes, report on personnel, and describe plans for the next year. And then there are 2 other types of RPPRs that are a little bit less common. A final RPPR is submitted when you're closing out your project. So the grant is finished, you're ready to wrap it up, and at the end of the project, you submit a final RPPR. And then lastly, an interim RPPR. So let's say that you have a 5-year grant and you decide to renew it or recompete for another 5-year funding cycle. This is when you would use an interim RPPR in between those 2 funding cycles. And And so if your project gets funded, the interim RPPR serves as your kind of regular annual update. If your renewal does not get funded, then the interim RPPR serves in place of the final RPPR. And I forgot to look at my note. There are very, very similar formats and very similar questions asked on all 3 of these RPPRs. So the format is not different. It is all the same format for all 3 of them. They just may ask a few additional questions depending on the type of report that it is. And where do you submit an RPPR? The answer is ERA Commons, which is NIH's grant portal. There's no RPPR form available to download, like most of the NIH forms. You submit your RPPR data directly through ERA Commons, the electronic portal system. And that is how you also access it, is in ERA Commons. I'll show you here in a little bit, but you can find it through the status tab or also the RPPR tab. And then for a final RPPR, that's in the closeout tab. And who can submit an RPPR? So the signing official of your organization is the only one who's delegated to actually submit the report to NIH, or they can delegate somebody else to do that. But many different people can have access to the RPPR, and you gain access through your PI. So a PI can assign you delegate access so that you can go in, view, and edit the RPPR, help fill it out, etc. And what is included in the report? So I would, as for most NIH things, just follow the instructions. And I've included the link down here for the general instructions. The user guide, it has very detailed instructions on how to submit it in ERA Commons, how to complete the forms, what information is required, etc. And then it also has instructions for completing the scientific portions of the reports, which would be helpful for your PIs to show them exactly what content they need to report on to NIH. And I also included a few links here that might be helpful for you as well. If you're a signing official or you want to show this to your signing official, how to get access from your PI, etc. And when are RPPRs due? So it depends on the type of award that you have, but the annual RPPRs are generally due if you're part of the SNAP program, then they are due 45 days before the start of the next budget period, the next budget year. So for example, if your budget year begins on June 1st, your RPPR is due 45 days ahead of that. So that would be April 15th. If you are not part of the SNAP program, then RPPRs are due 60 days before the next budget start date. So again, if your budget starts June 1st, your RPPR is due April 1st. However, when you look up and pull up the RPPR, it'll tell you exactly the date that it's due. So there shouldn't be too much confusion there. And then interim and final RPPRs, they are due 120 days after the end of your budget period. So if your grant finished on December 31st, 120 days later is April 30th, and that's when your final RPPR or interim RPPR would be due. And what is included in an RPPR? requests various types of information, including accomplishments, products that you've created or cited from the grant, participants and other collaborating organizations, the impact of your work, any changes or problems that you've encountered, budgetary information, and project outcomes. And here's just a screenshot from ERA Commons. And I'll do a live demo in ERA Commons in a little bit, but just to show you quickly. So here's ERA Commons homepage. And as you can see here, here is the RPPR tab. And you can search by PI, your grant number, etc. And so you'll see here, I searched and I found this RPPR. And to get it started, you just hit initiate. And if you're not able to edit any of these fields, I will show you some tips to check that. And here's the first one. So a lot of times we log in and somebody goes to work on a RPPR and they can't edit it, or they can only view it or something like that. So the first thing to double check is if you have the right privileges delegated by your PI. So your PI will have to go into ERA Commons. They will have to go to admin delegations, and they will have to make sure that you have RPPR privileges in ERA Commons. So that's step number one. Another possibility is that sometimes it'll lock you out if there's somebody else working on it. And so you can see who is the current reviewer for the RPPR, and whenever they're done, they might just have to route it to you. So that's another issue that you could try and resolve. And just something to think about is that the content of the RPPR changes depending on the type of grant that you have. So some grants require more information than others, or less information than others. And it's good to look at your RPPR ahead of time just to double check what exactly is going to be asked of you. And they are available to look at well in advance of the deadline. So you have plenty of time to log in and see exactly what's going to be asked. And then the good news is once you do the first one, they're going to ask for the same information every year. So that normally doesn't change. And here are a few tips and tricks from our group, as we've submitted a lot of these. The first one is version control. So unless you have locked the application, anyone who has access is able to go in and edit it. So this can be a problem because it's only saving the information for whoever clicks the button first, whoever hits save first. And so you don't want to overwrite anyone else's work or anybody else's changes. And so it's great to have a system for who is accessing the RPPR at one time. And that's why the route feature is sometimes helpful, because then you can lock it and make sure that you're the only person that can access it at one time. But that's just something to pay attention to. Formatting, there's pretty specific formatting required in RPPRs. I'll go into more detail about that, but really just pay attention to the instructions. And in the instructions, there's this whole section about what can you put in a text box, the size of a PDF, how you're going to format the PDF, and the style of the documents. There's a lot of information in the instruction manuals about about that. The third thing is your investigator, your PI, will likely, he'll be able to access, he or she will be able to access the RPPR. But sometimes you might be working on it at the same time. You want to make sure that they're not overwriting your work. So it's a great idea to create a template for them to fill out with the questions that they need to answer. And that way they can fill it out in a Word document. And then once that's finalized, you can take their Word document information and then paste it appropriately into the RPPR.
Thanks, Hillary. I just want to interject quickly because a lot of our partners would be more familiar with this. So for those of you who weren't sure if you'd submitted an RPPR, you know, we typically at Vanderbilt have a Word document that outlines each of the sections and with a little bit of instructions, and we get all of the pieces finalized. And then there's one delegated person at Vanderbilt who enters all of that information, sort of as a form of version control, like Hillary mentioned, but also just to make sure that we can get all of the input, you know, from all of the people that don't have access to of ERA Commons.
Thanks so much, Anne. That's great. All right. And then you'll really want to plan ahead. If you are the prime, you'll be needing to collect information from all of your different sites and all of the budget pieces and many different people. And so it takes some time just to get all that information back. And so just make sure that you give yourself enough time to plan for that. And then my last tip is to always save the page. Unless you literally hit save, it will not save your work. And I have been victim to this, where you enter in a bunch of information and it's looking great and you forget to hit the save button and it's all gone. So that's pretty frustrating, and hopefully you can avoid that.
I think that's another reason why we started using the Word documents to finalize everything and then just copy and paste into the system.
Exactly.
Avoid that happening, yeah.
Yeah, and here is what I'm talking about. At the top of every page, there is this save button, and you really want to make sure that you hit that before you move on to the next page. And just a little bit more about formatting. Pay attention to the word limits, and most of the time it's a character limit, and that includes spaces. So if it says this section, for example, it says 8,000 characters, that includes spaces. And so, I mean, 8,000 is kind of a lot, but some of the other sections are much smaller. And we've had times where investigators will just think it's a word limit, not a character limit, and then we have to go and trim their response a little bit more. So pay attention to that. And then no photos, tables, or special characters, anything like that, can be entered into these text box fields. If you upload something as a PDF, you will be able to include photos and tables inside your PDF file, but just a note to do not include those types of things in text box fields. Okay, so we are now going to do a demo of the RPPR system. Nope, come on. Oh. Here we go. So here's ERA Commons. I just logged in. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, cool. Wanted to make sure it was on the right screen. And I'm first going to go to the status tab. And then you'll see here when you do that, some other options should appear. So the way that you access just a regular annual RPPR is through the RPPR tab. So we're going to go there. And I'm going to put in a PI that I know has a report that I can look at. And here we go. So you'll see here's the report, the PI, the title of the application. And then as I mentioned, it'll tell you exactly what the due date should be. And that's the date that it should be submitted to NIH. So I'm going to click on this. And as you can see, this is not due for a while, and that's okay. And it's great that they are available in the system so far in advance. So if you want to go in and look at it, you'll have plenty of time to do that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and initiate this application. Okay, it's giving me a few warning messages. That's no problem. And then once it's been initiated, you'll see that I'm the current reviewer for this RPPR. And now I should be able to edit it. If you don't have any of those privileges, as I mentioned, you'll just need to double check them, and I'll show you how. But I now can click and edit this RPPR. So here are all what the forms look like. Did someone have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Sorry.
Go ahead, Samiri.
Yeah. Do you want to say as soon as you enter the PI's name, all the other information will appear, like the award number, the project title, and the like? Because I did not see you type the award number, the project title. Just enter in the PI's name, and then everything just came up. I don't know.
Yeah. So basically, it'll only show progress reports at your institution that you have investigators at your institution. So like, I can show you another one just for example. Here's another PI that I know. And so basically this person, Stephanie only has one progress report that's due. So all I had to do was put in her last name. Same with this one. Yuri only has one progress report that's due, and so I only needed to search by the one thing. If you put in the last name and nothing's coming up, you could try the grant number, something like that. But you don't have to fill out all the fields.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, and so the way that you get to each section is up here at the top of the page. And look, it's prompting me, make sure that you save. We didn't enter in any information, so it's okay, we're gonna leave. And so that is how you look at each of the different sections, is just by clicking up at the top here. And I'm going to go through each of the sections in detail, but that's just kind of an overview of how to get to them and how to look at them. And then it has all of the questions that you have to answer in each of the forms.
I will say that I have always found the toolbars to be, I don't know, like tiny little text, and it seems intuitive to me because it's like rows of toolbars, so it's like you see how Hillary, there's 3 different rows of toolbars there. So
it's
then manage RPPR, and then she's in C products, and all of that is so tiny that a while, to remember, like, oh right, this is tiny, and it's like rows of
Definitely. I know the menu system in ERA Commons is not great. Yeah. And so just another word, so once we go, this is kind of like the main RPPR page for this RPPR. And you'll see there's a few different options here of things that you can do. Edit, I showed you that one. Check for errors. So that's a great thing to do before you're almost ready to submit your RPPR, is check for errors. View is just, it'll download a copy as a PDF of the RPPR. So that's kind of nice if you want to send it to your PI for their review before you actually submit it. Routing history, so that's if you route it to somebody, then you'll be able to see who it all went to. And then some of these I don't have access to do. So as you can see here, I'm not able to route this. I can't recall it. I'm not even able to click on these buttons or submit it. I can't submit the application. And so that's because these roles are designated for someone in our Office of Sponsored Projects, our signing official. Those are the types of people that can have these capabilities, at least at our organization. And cancel is pretty self-explanatory, just exiting out of the application. Okay, so that was how you access an annual RPPR through the RPPR tab. If you need to submit a final RPPR or an interim RPPR, you do that through the status tab. So that's this one here, and this screen looks a little different. I forget, who was I gonna, oh yeah, I had to remember who I had done an interim RPPR for. Let's see. Need to make the dates. More dates. Okay, perfect. So this one, you can see here, there's a link for an interim RPPR. So for this application, we've had this grant, as you can see, for a long time. It's in year 17 now, 18. And so the last time that we submitted a competitive renewal, we had to submit an interim RPPR, and this was how you would access that. And then once you click on that, it looks exactly the same as the other RPPR format. This was already submitted, so I can't edit it, but you could download it if you want to look at a copy, etc. And then for a closeout, a final RPPR, let's see. Okay, perfect. So this project, this grant has been closed out already. So right now you're seeing this link here that says it's closed. If it wasn't yet closed out and you still needed to do the process for closeout, I think it just says closeout. So you would click that link. And then this is like a closeout screen of the things that you need to do for a closeout, like we talked about last week. And here you'll see the final RPPR. And so that is the way that you would edit and get to a final RPPR. And as I said, this one's already been closed, so we're not able to look at it, but we could download the application if we wanted to. Okay, so I think that's it for this brief demo. Does anyone have any questions before I move on and talk about each of the sections of the RPPR?
I have a question, Hillary.
Hey, Daphne, go ahead.
You know, when you initiated the RPPR initially, when I had to do it, I was asked a question about, do I need to initiate like a multi-component one or a single one or whatever? And like I had no idea. So I looked in all the ERA, what is that, the tutorials and all the things, and I could not for the life of me figure out what the difference was and which one to pick. So eventually I just picked one, and it actually was okay. But
Okay.
I think I was lucky. What is the difference? And
That's a great question. So multi-component applications, they're mostly big center grants. I'm trying to find an RFA for you. Here we go. So multi-component grants, they have multiple components or cores, as you might hear of it. And so the CFAR, for example, this is a type of a grant that is a really big grant and it has multiple cores. And basically what this lets you do, Daphne, is initiate an RPPR for each core. And then they're all linked to the same RPPR application, basically. And so when you would look in your application, you'd see an RPPR for the administrative core, an RPPR for the developmental core, and an RPPR for the basic science core. Most grants, you're not going to have to do this unless you have a center grant. Like this one's a P30. They're center core grants. Unless you have something like that, you do not need to do the multi-component. So you'll just select the other option, whatever that was. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you so much. Yes, very helpful.
Yeah, and I'll show you something. We accidentally, somebody accidentally initiated a multi-component for a grant that's not a multi-component, and I actually have it here. So it just looks a little different if you accidentally initiate it. It's not a problem. You'll still be able to submit your RPPR. But in order to edit it, you have to like click on these weird dots and hit edit. So it's no problem. We were still able to submit this RPPR, even though it wasn't technically the right way to do it, but it'll just look a little different.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, let me get back to my slide deck. Okay. Awesome. We already took our questions, but if you have anything else, feel free to interrupt me or put it in the chat. All right, and now I'm going to go through each section of the RPPR. We're going to talk about what's asked for in each section, kind of some considerations as a subaward that you might need to think about, and then common issues with each of the sections. All right, section A is pretty simple. It's just a cover page. It just lists general information about your grant and the PI and your organization. Pretty much all of this information is pulled from your original grant application. So if the information is incorrect, you'll need to contact ERA Commons or NIH to have them fix that. And you just answer a few questions on this page, such as, is there a change of the contact PI on a multi-PI award? And then who should be listed as your signing official and your administrative official? And as a subaward, you don't really need to worry about this section. The prime will enter in all this information for you. And here's just a screenshot of those three things that you have to answer. Is there a change of the PI? And then you just select from the list of users at your institution who should be designated in these two fields. Section B is accomplishments. And this is the kind of biggest scientific section of the progress report. And so this is what your PI will need to write and fill out. And as I mentioned, as an administrator, you could help them by sending a template to help them fill in the text of the report and just make note of all those character limits that we talked about. And here are the questions that they ask. What are the major goals of the project? That's just your grant aims, the aims of the grant. And that doesn't change each year. It's the same every time. What was accomplished under these goals during the last reporting period? If you have supplements, you'll need to write a separate little blurb about your supplements. What opportunities for training and professional development has the project provided? How have the results been disseminated to communities of interest? And what do you plan to do for the next reporting period to accomplish the goals of your grant? And as a subaward, the prime may ask you for some information to help fill in this section. For example, maybe they'll say, hey, please send us a paragraph or two describing your site progress in the last year, something like that. And then basically the investigative team will combine all of the text sections to complete this section of the report. And some common issues with section B, as I mentioned, exceeding the character limit. That could be an issue for many sections across the RPPR, but particularly this one. Forgetting to attach a file, that's always a bummer if you forget to attach it before you submit your report. Forget to select nothing to report. So I'll show you, oh, here's a screenshot of somewhere where you would add an attachment. And so you just want to make sure that you do that if it asks for it. And then here's this nothing to report section. It's okay to not have something to say for every question, but you'll either have to check the box or answer a response. You'll have to do one or the other. You can't just leave it blank. And then, sorry, this is covering up my thing now. As I mentioned, special characters and tables. You can't put any special characters or tables into these text fields like we mentioned earlier. All right, section C is about products. In this section, you'll report on publications associated with the grant. And as Holly talked about last week, the public access policy, you'll need to make sure that your publications have PMCIDs. Technologies and techniques you've developed, inventions, patents, licenses, and then other products or resource sharing. And again, this is something that your investigator will really have to fill in themselves, but you can send them a template to help them get a list going. And give yourself time to make sure, as we talked about last week, that all the publications are linked to your grant and are compliant and have a PMCID. The publications in ERA Commons, they pull in from My NCBI, and your investigator will have a My NCBI account. And so if you need to make any changes to the publication list, most of the time, those changes need to be made directly in My NCBI. As a subaward, if you have any publications associated with the grant, the prime may ask you to please send the citation, and if they're not linked to a PMCID or linked to the grant, they may ask you to help with that sort of thing. And here are some common issues with section C. A publication is not appearing in the list of options. As I mentioned, you'll have to add it and in My NCBI. If a publication is non-compliant, the investigative team is going to have to go through the process to get a PMC ID. And one funny issue that we've seen a few times lately is, what if a publication is showing up multiple times in duplicate, or maybe even 3 times? This is due to it being a multi-PI award. If there are more than 1 PIs, sometimes it'll show, like if there are 2 PIs, sometimes it'll show the publications always in duplicate. And this is like a system error, and it doesn't have to do nothing to do with you or how you put it in or anything like that. And you can just leave it that way. NIH is aware of the issue, and that's okay. And I put the link to my NCBI here. As I mentioned, this is something mostly that investigators manage, so you don't necessarily need to do that, but if they have an issue, that's where you can direct them, is to my NCBI. Section D is participants. So this section will ask what individuals have worked on the project, and then are there any personnel updates? And so for the update section, you would report any changes in effort for key personnel that were greater than 25% change. I'm going to go into that in a second here. If there are new key personnel, you will submit their other support and a biosketch. If there are changes in other support, almost every key personnel is going to have a change to their other support file. And we've talked about other support files in the past. So I would just plan to submit an other support file for almost all key personnel. And you'll need to upload that all as one PDF. So you have to combine all the PDF files. And then lastly, it'll ask if there's a change in the multi-PI plan. And so when you fill out the what individuals have worked on the project section, you'll report on personnel that have committed at least 1 calendar month effort to the project in the last year. And that equals out to be about 8.3% annual effort. So if someone's worked that much or more, you'll report them in this section. And a Commons ID is required for all key personnel and individuals who are postdocs or who are supported by a reentry or diversity supplement. And as a subaward, the prime will likely send you a form to fill out all the personnel that have worked on the project at your site. And I'll show you all the information that needs to get included. So name, are they a senior or key personnel? What is their role on the project? If they had support from a supplement, how much effort they dedicated to the project. We mostly use calendar months. And then are they affiliated with an international organization? And then if so, you'd list their organization name and the country. And so you may have seen a form to fill out this information for your site. Okay, so a little break. I'm probably putting everybody to sleep here. We're going to do a quiz question that relates to personnel effort. In your grant application, you budgeted your PI for 100% effort. After the grant is awarded, your PI says that he only wants to work 50% effort on the project. What do you do? Option A is to tell him it's okay, and then in your year 1 RPPR, submit in section D that the PI worked 6.0 calendar months or 50% effort. Section B is to submit a prior, or option B is to submit a prior approval request to NIH for the PI to reduce his effort. And option C is to tell him that he has to work 100% effort on the project. So where's my polls? tell me what you think. Again, quite a few responses. I'll give it like 30 more seconds. Okay. All right, here are the responses. So most people selected the correct answer, which was option B, submit a prior approval request to NIH for the PI to reduce his effort. And that is definitely what you want to do. Basically, if you want to have a greater than 25% effort change, you have to ask NIH about it first. And so he doesn't necessarily have to work 100% effort on the project, but you just have to ask NIH's approval for that. And then we wouldn't want to go with option A because that's basically telling NIH that you already made this change before you asked approval for it. And that's not a good idea either. And so great job. Most people selected the right answer. Okay, so section D, common issues. Forgetting to include an ERA Commons ID for people who it's required. And then as we talked about, reporting a greater than 20% effort change without requesting prior approval first. You really want to deal with those effort issues before it's time to report them in your RPPR. It really doesn't look good to NIH if you report less effort than they should have been dedicating, and they will ask about this. And then lastly, issues with other support files. NIH may come back and ask questions about other support files. And now that the new format has been implemented, they definitely have been coming back with questions and issues. Making sure that you have the electronic signatures on the other support files. I had to resubmit about 40 other support files because they didn't have electronic signatures last month. So that was fun. All right, section E is about the impact of your project. What is the impact on physical, institutional, or information resources that form infrastructure? And this is one of those questions where the answer may be nothing to report. What is the dollar amount of the award's budget spent in international countries? So as an administrator, this is something that you can help with, is tallying up how much funding was spent at international sites, and you report this on a country level. And as a subaward, the prime may ask you how much you've spent in the last year, and it's so that they can answer this question. And I'll show you what that looks like. You'll report just the total dollar amount going to a specific country in the last year. And so this is how it'll show up. So if you have multiple sites in the same country, you'll just need to aggregate that.
And maybe just a quick point there, thanks Hillary, is that for some of these questions, I think it's important to confirm, is the question talking about the current year that you've just done on the project versus the next year? Because the RPPR is also the opportunity to submit your budget for the next year and your plans for the next year. So this question is for the year that has, that is wrapping up, how much money was spent, not how much will be spent in your budget that you're submitting.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and it should, hopefully in the RPPR itself, you'll be able to see if they're asking for this budget period or the next budget period. But if it's not clear, the instruction manual will always tell you exactly which reporting period. And so that's a great place to reference if you are not sure. Thanks, Hen. Okay, and section F is any changes you've experienced in the last year. So if you've had any actual or anticipated challenges or delays in the project, and then plans to resolve them. So this is the section where your investigator could talk about if they've had delays, if so, what were they, and how are you going to get past those and move forward and complete the project. In the last few years, we've been writing pretty extensive paragraphs to this just because COVID has impacted so much research work. And so we've definitely been filling out this section, talking about challenges due to COVID, et cetera. And then you'll also report if you have any changes to your human subjects section, vertebrate animals, biohazards, or select agents research. And as a sub-award, the prime may ask you if you've experienced any delays or issues with the project and how you might resolve them. And it's so that they can answer this question. Okay, section G talks about special reporting requirements. This section has a lot of different pieces to it, so I'm going to go through each one of them. The first thing that asks is if you have any special terms associated with your NOGA. And so you want to double check your NOGA and see if it tells you anything special or different that you need to report in your RPPR. And if so, this is the section where you would do that. You want to have an update if you have human subjects on your project to your enrollment tables. If you enrolled participants in the last year, you'll need to just update that on your tables. And you can provide a template to your PI to fill that out. If you've had any new personnel involved in human subjects research, you'll need to report on their human education requirement. Like we talked about last week, it's required that they participate in a responsible conduct of research course. And so that's where you would report any new personnel. You'll list the performance sites associated with your grant, the foreign components that are associated with your grant, and your NOGA has a list of all the foreign components that you'll need to report on. Mostly it's by site. And then you'll also then report on your estimated unobligated balance going into the next year or your carry forward, and if you've had any program income. And as a sub-award, the prime will likely ask you for how much carry forward you think you're going to have at the end of the year. And this is so that they can answer this question about how much money is going to be left. And they also may ask you if you've had any new personnel involved in human subjects education and ask for their RCR certificates. And here are a couple of common issues with section G. Forgetting to report on a foreign component or site. As I mentioned, your NOGA is going to have a list of all of the foreign components that are considered in your application, and you'll just need to make sure that you're reporting on each one of those. Forgetting to submit your human subjects updates before you submit the RPPR. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And then not providing a sufficient explanation for an unobligated balance. So they don't give you a lot of space to describe why you might have greater than 25% unobligated balance. I think, yeah, you can see here they only give you 700 character limit, which is not very much space. And so sometimes you might need to write in more detail about why you have a high unobligated balance. And if that's the case, I try to put some things into the section F, the challenges and delays section, to describe scientifically why you may not have spent all the money. And you'll only need to report on this if you have estimated carry forward that's greater than 25% of the current year's total budget. So you may have to say no. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, Hillary.
It's okay.
I just, based on what you were just saying, I thought it might be good to share that for this most recent round of RPPRs, we did have one that had, it was because of COVID and, a lot of reasons that we included in the RPPR, but it was so high that they asked us to submit a detailed carry forward budget. And we'd never been asked to do that before. So I thought I would just mention that, if it's above a certain threshold of amount of funds that you're asking to carry forward, they do tend to want more information about why, but also specifics on how are you going to spend this money in addition to the next project year that you're also asking for.
Yeah, we had that happen last year too. And also due to COVID, we just couldn't get samples shipped, and thus we couldn't do the analysis that we had planned in the lab. And so because of that, we just had a huge amount of carry forward. And after we submitted our RPPR, NIH did ask us the same, to submit a carry forward budget for how we were planning to spend the carry forward. And they did approve it once we submitted that. And they said it was okay. But yeah, you may be asked for additional information. Yeah, that's good to know. Okay, and then I'm going to quickly show you a human subjects system, because it is not exactly in the RPPR. It's kind of outside of it. Oh no. Okay. Let's see if I'm still logged in here. Yeah, okay. Okay, so we're going to go to our RPPR. This project does involve human subjects. And so the human subject section is part of section G, special reporting requirements. And here it is, section G.4. And so you want to submit updates, and you'll have to link out to another system to do that. So when you click this link, it'll take you to where you will provide that update. So this is like a totally separate system, as you can see from the RPPR. And this requires, once you make your updates, that you also submit it. And so you always want to make sure that this human subjects update gets submitted before your RPPR gets submitted, or else it won't reflect the updates that you made in this system. And if anybody has specific questions about this, I'm very familiar with the system, and I'd be happy to help you out if you need anything. But just wanted to let you know that you have to do this separately, and you'll save it here, and then it'll reflect when you submit your RPPR. Okay. Back to the slides. Okay, and then the last section is section H, which is your budget. You'll only need to submit a budget if you are a non-SNAP award, and it'll tell you that in your NOGA. The budget forms look exactly like the NIH budget forms in the application. And you only submit a budget for the coming year. So that's something to keep in mind. And you want to make sure that if you do have to submit a budget, that your total budget matches what the NOGA awarded for that year. And the NOGA will have approximate amounts of money for how much is awarded in each year of the project. And you want to make sure that you're hitting that amount. NIH is not going to give you any more money than they originally promised. They may give you less if you don't submit your budget correctly. So something to keep in mind. And as a subaward, the prime will probably ask you for a budget for the coming year, regardless of whether or not they have to submit it in the RPPR. And this is just helpful for contracting because then we can use that budget for your next year's contract. Oops, that was a mistake slide. And as you can see, if you do not have to submit a budget, when you go to section H, it'll just say not applicable. So if it says that in your RPPR, you don't have to submit a budget. Yay. And if that's the case, you'll just go based on the budget that you submitted in your grant application. Okay, and then Holly, I don't know if you want to just briefly talk about training grants.
Sure. So thanks, Hillary. So you'll remember, hopefully from GAIN Part 1 and some reminders in GAIN Part 2, the NIH has multiple categories of grants. And the RPPR sections that Hillary described most closely align with the research grants. Many of you partner with us on research training grants. The sections are similar, but they're slightly different. So I thought I would explain why some of the requests that we send you for those of you that work with us on training grants might be slightly different than what Hillary described. So just so you know, in section B4, there is a question about what opportunities for training and professional development has the project provided. On a research grant, that's typically not, very long. You can kind of talk about, task shifting or training of personnel, that kind of thing. But this is a major section on a training grant, as you might appreciate. This is where you have to talk about all of the training activities, all the workshops we did, paragraphs in detail about all of our trainees. What courses did they take? Where they are in their training, what they're working on for their thesis projects. There's very specific elements of a training grant write-up, and that goes in B4. Another difference in section D, participants, we have to have ERA Commons for not only the key personnel, but we have to have it for all trainees, and that is required. So this is why I'll email many of you and say, hey, I need ERA Commons for all the trainees. We have to show how many months they were sponsored on the training grant. They have to be included. The next thing is section G, the special notice terms and reporting requirements. And G1, we have to put for any of the trainees that have research projects that were conducted during the reporting period. We have to have their research ethics committee or their IRB protocol number, which REC approved them, the date of expiration. We have to have that in there for all of our trainees. Then for G2, like I talked about last week and Hillary just shared, we have to have the RCR training and GCP training for all key personnel, and then the trainees. And for key personnel, it can be every 1 to 3 years. For trainees, it's every year. We have to show that they're receiving training. We have to describe the training. Specifically for training grants, this has to be comprised of not only a formal course, but you also have to describe one-on-one mentoring, how they receive research ethics training throughout their training time. And is there anything I've forgotten?
No, I think that's comprehensive. I think maybe just a quick reminder that I know we've thrown a lot of information out at you. We're just trying to summarize. The instructions for all of these RPPRs are very detailed. It's just they're very long. So these slides, I think, can be a helpful tool, but they are all, you know, explained in detail. It's just a long document.
Yeah, thanks.
Super helpful. Thank you, guys. I don't work on as many training grants, so I appreciate your expertise there. Okay, and then kind of the last step is making sure that you don't have any errors in your application. Once you've filled everything out, you've saved it, it's looking good. You want to check for errors to make sure that you don't have any before you submit. And you'll laugh that I generated an error report for an RPPR that was totally blank. Like we hadn't filled anything out yet. And as you can see, there's a lot of problems. And if you're having issues with ERA Commons and it's something that you can't fix, contact the ERA Commons help desk. They're going to be the best tool to resolve any technical problems with an RPPR. And then as I kind of showed you when we did the demo, that's how you would check for errors on the main screen of the RPPR. All right, guys, that is the end of this session. Does anyone have any questions about RPPRs or just questions in general? I'm happy to answer whatever.
I'm watching for hands, but also feel free to put questions in the chat if that's easier with how you're connecting today.
I think just some words of advice. As Hillary, walked you through, there's a lot of sections. We talked about in game part 1 about all the sections to submit a grant. Our PPRs have a lot of sections, a lot of, things that you have to request out. So it's really important for you to plan, start planning 2 months ahead of the due date, give yourself a very detailed timeline, keep track of who you requested information from. You may have to send reminders because it can get, very complicated when you're down, to the deadline, trying to track down all these ERA comments and stuff like that. So utilize your team, assign tasks. That's really the way of success to get these RPPRs out.
Yeah, and I know that this was mentioned already, but maybe just to reiterate that the submission is really the responsibility of the prime. And so for those of you that might feel a little overwhelmed by everything that was reviewed today, if you've only been serving as a sub-awardee, then that's why you wouldn't have seen these things, and you won't be required to submit them until you're a prime. But that is what we're all working for, for your institutions. And so we just want to make sure that it's on everybody's radar, but we acknowledge that, each of you could be at different points of that process.
Excellent. Thanks, you guys. And I'm going to post on the website a blank Word document template that I send to my investigators that they fill out the more scientific sections of the RPPR. And that's just a guide. Like I said, you need to check your RPPR specifically to make sure that the right questions are included in that template. But it might help you at least have somewhere to start with. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask us later. Okay, I think we're going to take a break. Do we have time for 5 minutes, 10 minutes? What do you guys think?
I think we have time for a 10-minute break. and then we can get into the project tracking module. But yeah,
Awesome.
been good on time. So 10-minute break.
All right, sounds good, everybody. We'll come back in 10 minutes. That's at like 8:24.
Nine. Well, it's
Not-
I guess
oh,
whatever time zone.
Sorry,
you're on.
whatever time it is for you.
All right, thanks, y'all. We'll be right back.
Thanks.
Plenty of we'll go ahead and get started on the second module of today's class. So for those of you that participated in GAIN Part 1, you might recognize some of this material that we're about to cover. We previously reviewed a lot of this from a planning for project tracking as part of our pre-award activities in proposal writing. And we're now revisiting the topic as it's an essential aspect of post-award management. So project management and the tracking and evaluation of progress is one of the key ways we know if we're achieving what it is that we set out to do with a given project. So to start, we're going to discuss how our grant proposal and subcontract document can help us know which steps to take, these key proposal elements. And after we review that, we'll get into indicator reviews and a Gantt chart review and practice, and then move on to a brief overview of online project tracking. And then specifically, I'm going to demo the Asana online software for everyone. I see something just came up in the...
Just me. I'm so sorry, you guys. I realized I never turned on the live transcript at the beginning of class, but I've now turned it on.
Okay.
Apologies.
Thanks. No worries. Thanks for letting us know. Okay, so digging right in. So once you've received an award, the contract is finalized, and those initial administrative steps are complete to initiate the award. But really the big burning question is, what did we say we were going to do? You know, when we wrote this grant application, sometimes it can take a long time before you hear back from a donor and you actually get awarded. And so oftentimes a team has to be remembered of exactly what you wrote in the grant application. You know, what did you say you were going to do if you received these funds? So often the best place to start for this is your award application. So regardless of the funding agency, chances are the grant application or proposal had a list of key activities to be conducted or specific aims to achieve. It may have even included a list of indicators that would inform success of the project based on those activities. And if you were involved in preparing the proposal, you'll likely be pretty familiar with the project and what was outlined in the grant application. But if you weren't and you're being asked to help just in the post-award process, asking for the final approved proposal documents from the PI or the project team is really step one, and thoroughly review everything that was included in the grant application, because essentially that's what a donor is giving you the money for. From their mind, that's what they approved, was everything that was written in the grant application. So once you have a good sense of what your team said you would do for a grant or a project, it's up to the team to determine how you will know if the project is succeeding in its aims or objectives. So how will you quantify or measure project success for your team? For research studies, often data variables and analysis can respond to a research question, but we may also need measures of project implementation success. These would be ways to inform what you write in an RPPR, for example, or whatever your funder is, what their routine reports require. So I know we talked about indicators in pre-award, but so this is really just a reminder for those of you who already have this on your radar. But indicators are measurable values of project effectiveness, often called key performance indicators, that determine how effectively an individual or team or organization is achieving a project objective. Indicators help individuals at all levels focus their work towards achieving a common goal, and can also help an organization understand whether or not they're achieving what they set out to do. As I said, for research studies that have very specific data variables that will be collected and analyzed, they will often serve as your study indicators. However, often when implementing a project for which you've been funded, it may also be necessary to outline which indicators or numbers you will track along the way to help evaluate if you've been achieving what the project set out to do. So typically, indicators are set during the pre-award process. And we covered this slide in GAIN pre-award training. But sometimes when you get into the implementation phase of a project, you realize that certain indicators that you included need to be adjusted, or maybe you need to add some process indicators for tracking implementation points along the way. So just a review here, that there is sort of a mnemonic device, maybe we would say, to remember how to set up a well-defined indicator using this SMARTER framework. So as you see here, it's important first, this S here, it's important that an indicator is specific, giving a detailed, simple, and clear description of exactly what you want to achieve. For example, instead of saying improve patient retention, that's pretty broad. A better indicator might be improve adult patient retention in ART services by 10% at the patient's 6-month follow-up. You know, there's a lot of details there that give that specificity. Just moving along the road here, it's also important that indicators are measurable or quantifiable to establish an exact definition of success. And when thinking about ways to measure, consider using dollar amounts or percentages or raw numbers that make it a little bit easier to quantify these measures of success. So maybe your project plans to conduct quarterly faculty mentorship trainings, for example. The quantifiable numbers for this, or indicators, might include tracking the number of trainings conducted along the way. So that would be probably at least 4, 1 for every quarter within a year. The number of participants that attended each training. And you may even want to include a pre and post training evaluation and share the proportions of the training evaluation results. You know, for a given question, X percentage of respondents remembered this aspect of mentorship, for example. So in addition to these elements here, it's also important that your indicators are achievable. You know, I think oftentimes donors, when donors set the indicators themselves, I know the CDC does this all the time, they tend to make these targets that are almost unachievable. And it's really important that your indicators are ambitious, but attainable within reason. So this ensures that individuals on your team are motivated and challenged, but also don't burn out. So moving along, it's important that they're relevant. An indicator should really help advance the larger institution's objectives as well. And also time bound. So, you know, selecting this ambitious yet realistic amount of time in which you'll measure progress towards these key process indicators. So for example, you might decide that you want to achieve a certain amount of reach within a community by a certain amount of time. So maybe at the end of year one, you would say that 75% of your community has received a certain intervention that your project is doing. So not just leaving these items open, but kind of giving yourself these internal deadlines for when you will meet certain targets. And then lastly, the E and the R are a little more broad. So the E here is to evaluate your indicators. So regularly examining an indicator plan is a great way to ensure that you're still working towards the right objectives. And like I mentioned before, sometimes they do have to be adjusted. It's not ideal, but sometimes when the field team goes towards implementing things, it's realized that either the indicator isn't relevant or it just wasn't set up the right way and it's not actually measuring what it should be. So it's important that you evaluate these sort of things. And then the R, reevaluating and readjusting along the way. So it might be that halfway through your project time frame, you take a look at, are these indicators responding to everything the donor wants them to? And sometimes the donor will even come back to you and the project team and ask that you start tracking something new, So a lot of this is actually flexible. So how often should we monitor project progress on our grant? And this brings us to the next poll, Hillary. So how often should we monitor the progress on our grants? You should be seeing a poll pop up here. And the response options are weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, at closeout, or continuously. So take a look at that poll. There are really no wrong answers here. Just curious what people's thoughts are on this. I'll give it just a little bit of time because we're not getting that many responses in, but eager to hear from you, get your opinion. We've got about 9 so far. I don't know if anyone else is still seeing the poll pop up. But we've got quite a range of responses. And it looks like the bulk of the group is feeling that quarterly monitoring is ideal. I do appreciate, so I'll go ahead and end the poll now and share results. But I'm happy to see that no one thought that monitoring at closeout is the right frequency of monitoring. As I said, there really there's not a right answer here. It's up to you and your team to decide, contextually what makes the most sense. In practice, I personally at Vanderbilt feel responsible for continuous monitoring of our projects. And it's really a daily exercise to keep up with everything that we have going on. But we also acknowledge that that might not be the case for everyone else and everyone else's team, So only you and your team can know the right amount of project check-in for you.
Also, and sorry, Don, I wanted to also say it might depend on your role on the project too. If you're only responsible for project finances, maybe you only need to do that monthly, versus if you're a program manager and you're involved in the research, you're probably checking in on a more frequent basis.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's a great point. So it differs by role, by project, by institution. But we just want to make sure that everyone is reflecting on it, and if you're new to the game, giving time to consider, these aspects. So routine project monitoring will likely look different at every institution. There are internal policies and context to consider, but some good rules of thumb to include along the way, I've listed out here. So working with the PI and implementation team to create a monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan. often referred to as a MEL plan. Historically, this was referred to as an M&E plan, but the expansion of this phrasing to include learning at the end, I think was initiated by USAID, and it was meant to capture this necessary step of using the information you receive from evaluating your project and really improving the implementation accordingly. And so also, it's important to determine with what frequency the plan will be checked. So we were just chatting about a bit of this, but it could be, again, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, potentially even annually. But if a team waits until a required annual report is due, like the RPPR, for example, they could find that either they don't actually know what has taken place for the project, or come to find out that nothing was implemented as it was planned. And then you're really at a disadvantage because you have no content to write in the RPPR. And that's when we get into the territory of donors considering reducing your budget that was planned. You know, I mean, worst case scenario, they could, you know, cancel the project. But just to mention, you know, that's why finding some form of incremental review and tracking of the project can be so important. And then lastly, confirming the method for monitoring progress. This could look different for every partner. It might be that everyone is monitoring progress through conference calls routinely, or in-person meetings, or internal reports that you all decide as a team you're going to create. It could be through site visits or through tracking tools. And that's a bit of what we're gonna be covering next. So everyone was asked to watch a very brief 5-minute Gantt chart video prior to this session. So I hope that if you were able to view that, that laid the groundwork for what a Gantt chart is for anyone that's unfamiliar. We won't spend a ton of time on this since the video gives a nice summary, but just to review, a Gantt chart is a type of bar chart that illustrates a project schedule for activities. And I do acknowledge that this is likely just review for a lot of you, but this type of chart lists the tasks to be performed on the vertical axis and time intervals for when they should be implemented on the horizontal axis. So the width of the horizontal bars and coloring in the graph shows the duration of each activity. And overall, Gantt charts illustrate the start and finish dates of summary elements of a project. There's a wide variety of project tracking charts out there that expand on this even further. But this is what a basic approach might look like. So as you see here, I've just taken a snapshot of an example Gantt chart that breaks down activities by quarters or 3-month blocks of time. And usually this level of information is sufficient for a grant submission to show you how activities play out. But would it be helpful when it comes to implementation of daily activities in a project? Maybe, you know, it really just depends on your team, how you communicate with one another, and how everyone is sort of held responsible for the activities that you wrote in your grant submission. So you see here that this includes columns for percentage done or percentage completed for each activity listed to help track the progress made. If your team is like really keeping that updated, then this might be sufficient. There's also columns depicting which team member a given activity is assigned to, who is responsible for seeing this through. So something like this for your team might be just fine. There are options for daily or weekly tracking that your team might choose to really just have a more complex Gantt chart that includes these specifics and depicts completion at the daily level. But as I said, there are so many templates out there and more advanced software, a lot of it proprietary, so you would have to pay for it, but some of it is available for free. And I feel like really the key is just finding a tool that works for you and your team. If nobody uses it, then it could all just be unnecessary work. So by no means am I saying that everyone needs to now be using Gantt charts for project tracking. We just want to, explore some of this and make sure that teams are thinking of how will they track it. And then, we're just giving a few tools for options if you don't currently have, a well-defined system for this. So we're going to have a breakout activity, and I emailed this to everyone yesterday. I tried to give you options for accessing the files. So we have a case study. I sent it as an attachment to the email and also linked it as a Google document. So when we break out into rooms, we ask that someone from each group share their screen to show the case study for everyone, and then review the case study as a group and discuss the scenario shared. So each group will have 20 minutes to complete the activity. And afterwards, there will be a report out for each group. So if you can, go ahead and designate who in your group will be speaking on behalf of everyone. And remember, there are no wrong answers here. So please feel free to speak freely. This case study is meant to just get people thinking, how might you go through the planning process? And you don't necessarily have to actually complete the Gantt chart template that I shared. If folks want to just make a bulleted list of your ideas, that's totally fine too. So I do see a comment in the chat. Oh, thank you, Hillary. So Hillary has linked to the case study. And I think we'll just pop into groups now, and I'll stop sharing. And then we can get going with the activity.
Perfect. And just making sure the rooms are even here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we've got the link there. Click the link to see the prompt, and I'm putting everyone in their rooms now. And if anyone has, actually, hold on, it's not even, 1 second. Okay, if anyone has any questions, let us know. And like I said, we'll have about 20 minutes in.
Yes, and I did just want to say something quickly, Hillary, because I'm realizing now that if we all start making lists in the Google document, it'll all be on the same one. So I'm going to open for my group the Word document, just so that it's not, everybody, all of the teams in the same list.
Sure. Okay, sounds good. All right, here we go. Let us know if you have any questions.
was on mute. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope that your breakout room experiences were as fun as our breakout room was. And I'm eager to hear how it went for everyone. So Hillary, Holly, do you all want to call? I don't know if you all already identified who will report out on your group.
I don't remember what group I was. Who was group 1?
I think you were group
You,
1.
we were
Holly.
group 1, Holly.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, somebody's trying to call me. So I'm going to call on, I'm going to share my screen because we took our notes, and I'm going to call on Abu Bakr to talk about the financial and the regulatory. And then I want to call on Awal to talk about the like the protocol monitoring. So Abu Bakr, take it away.
Hello, good day all.
Hi,
Can you hear me?
we can.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
that's good. Actually, our group was so participatory, and it's like each and everyone participated fully, and all the what you can see on the screen is the contribution of all of us. So I think we started with, as she said, I'm going to only talk about the financial aspect. So, you know, it's like at the initial stage, you have to develop your budget. The budget contains all the expenses that you're going to incur. That budget, you must obtain an approval. It is the guideline of what and what you want to buy, what and what you want to do, the salary you are going to pay. Everything about the project is in that budget. And all your requests must be in line with the provision of that budgetary provision. Anything outside that, for example, here in AKTH, whenever we sign an agreement with Bandit, what they usually do, even our internal auditors, they first of all go through your budget. So even on your monthly invoice must be in line with that budget. Anything outside that, they will not approve it. Even if Bandit will send that money to AKTH, they will never give you that money. So then you have to generate and process your sub-award. Then let me quickly go fast because I know I don't have time. Then there is a procurement of study items. You know, it's like there is also here I want to just be given a typical example here what to have in AKTH. There is what you call a procurement unit. That procurement unit is specifically in charge of procuring anything. Even if Banda will agree that, for example, you are supposed to purchase laptops, that laptops purchase must go in line with the procurement processes in AKTH, and that unit will be in charge of that. As a project coordinator, you only write and seek for approval. The chief medical director will send it to them. They are the one to process everything, then finally they will send it back to him before he gives final approval. Participant reimbursements of transportation fees. So it's like, as we divided this into two, it's like the participant actually, they may be engaged in some other things that you have to pay them for their transportation, or there are some patients that you must pay for their transportation fee because they have to travel for them to go and seek for services. So all these ones are all also contained in your budget, as well as sometimes this kind of thing, it has to go to IRB. They have to approve for you to pay a single fee that will to do the patient. Then the budget monitoring. Budget monitoring, that is specifically to monitor how you are doing your budget. Are you in line with the budget or outside your budget? Are you above what you are the approved budget or below? So that is what specifically what the monitoring will be doing. Airport tracking study team salary. You know, this airport tracking is like it will be you'll be tracking the effort put on by each and every participant in the program. Stroke study team. You know, the salary payment is mostly on monthly basis. On monthly basis, you have to apply for the payment to first bundle bill. That is through monthly invoice that you have to send to. That monthly invoice is tied to each person effort. Somebody may be on 20%, somebody may be on 10%, somebody may be on 5%. That has to be specifically in that category and in that order. Any deviation from that, even from here, it will not be accepted. Vanderbilt will not even accept it. So if it's in line with everything, when you send a monthly budget to Vanderbilt, they will now send in the wire confirmation. After the wire confirmation, then the money will drop into the institution account, for example, in here in AKTH. Once it's there, then another process will start. That process is you will now identify each of that person, for example, his name, details, his airport, the amount of money is supposed to be paid. Auditors will check that. There is also monitoring unit. They also have to check that before the chief medical director, that is the chief executive, will give final approval for payment. That's how it is. I don't know that I'm going to also talk about IRAB approval.
Thank you, Abu Bakr. We can pass it to Awal to go through quickly so we can hear from the other teams. Awal, are you there? Uh-oh. I didn't see if he...
Can I continue before you come in?
Awal's on.
Or somebody will do that.
But maybe.
He's on, but he's having trouble.
Okay.
I think it's fine, Abu Bakr, if you want to run through this just really quickly.
Okay, the IRB structure, REC approval. Here in AKTH, we don't even call it IRB, we call it ethical approval, because there's a committee specifically for that. So that committee comprises of different personalities. For example, the current chair of IRB in AKTH is a professor, one of the oldest professors in Aminu Kano Teaching Hospital. He's the one chair in that committee. And he's somebody that sticks to the rule.
Sorry, my network was going off. I can hear, but I cannot speak. So, thank you.
So I don't know whether Awal you are going to take over or I should continue.
Okay, let me go on the IRB.
Okay.
Yeah. Then we have the IRB, that is Institutional Review Board, and then Research Ethics Committee approval. Whatever you call them, they are all the same. They go through the protocol and all the study contents to ensure that the human subject protection is well established. And then it's all part of the regulatory authority. We have the institution, and then we have the state at certain point, and then we have the institution, international regulatory authority also. Then the next is the research coordinator and good clinical practice training for all the staff. You have to ensure that all the staff have attained the good clinical practice training as is required by the regulatory. Then the material transfer agreement. This sometimes it has to come because you have to look at a lot of in-between obstacles and the agreement between like the Vanderbilt University and also Aminu Kano Teaching Hospital to ensure that there is an agreement in a line in which materials will be transferred between the two institutions. Then you go on to develop the protocol. This protocol, we have the manual of procedures protocol, which actually will define what each and every member of the team will actually do. You can have the protocol and you can have the manual of procedures, which is the MOP, which also is a broader explanation of the study activities or the trial activities. Then you go on to develop data management plan. This will define what process will you adopt in collecting the data, whether you're going to use a paper or you're going to use electronic, and then how do you keep it safe? How do you plan it? How do you control it? How do you ensure the confidentiality of whatever data you collected? All this must be in the plan. Then the protocol training is very essential for all the members of the study team to ensure that they understood what the study or the trial is all about. So the coordinator, with the guidance of the principal investigator, will now put the members of the staff to training. They will be trained on how the recruitment, what are the eligibility, what are the exclusion criteria, and then the samples that needed to be taken, and then if the vaccines components, and what if we have a phlebotomist, what they needed to do. Each and every staff will have to understand clearly what his role and responsibilities are. And then identifying aims, activities, resources for implementation. This is also essential because this material resources and the activities will actually define how we are going to, how the study or the trial is going to actually achieve its aim. So it's very, very essential. Then developing a study schedule. For each study, you have stage by stage activity where how do you first plan your activities. That is the first, how do you recruit? How do you now, when do you actually actually start analysis? Like this is the general activities of the whole study that at a glance you will see the study progress. Then identifying when reports are due and when it's required, also technical and financial. This is also very, very essential because this will have to be in line with the requirement of the authority. Hire study coordinator. Although I've mentioned the training at the top, but you find that some of the activities actually the research coordinator will be the one to spearhead the activity even before the main start of the activity. So the planning of most of these activities will be done by the coordinator employed, and then it will be ratified by the investigator. So start of meeting. This is when the investigator and the coordinator will sit with virtually everybody to ensure that every aspect of the study is ready, nothing is missing, and what are the challenges that are facing, what is shortcoming, and how do we actually take care of that. Site assessment, initiation, visit. If there are multiple sites, it is required that there will be site assessment where you will have to go and see, will you be able to get your recruitment numbers there? And then are there also materials? And then if you need to transport sample, will it be convenient to ensure that you get this sample from one site to another? This is just to ensure that this site is actually qualified to in line with the protocol of the study. Then study recruitment plan and startup, which is part of the activities where you now decide how do you recruit your participants. Are you going to use the in-house, that is just like the health hub in the hospital, or are you going to use the radio, or you are going to use newspaper, or you are going to use a community in terms of a community approach in terms of their recruitment plan. Then monitoring of study milestone, recruitment rate. The most important aspect of this is you match it with the retention percentage, because as long as you are recruiting participants, you still want the numbers, you still want to make sure that loss to follow up, drops out are very, very low. So you have to review what are the challenges, what could be the complaint that will make participants to drop out, or to say they are not, after they sign consent, to say that they are not going to continue with the study anymore. And study marketing radio, which is part of the recruitment plan. Then engage with community when you engage with the CAB, that is the, is it the Community Assessment Board? I think this was one of the, I've forgotten what this means.
That's right. Yeah, the Community Advisory Board.
Yeah, so for the Community Advisory Board, that is, it's all part of the recruitment plan and also the study marketing, because if your study has to do with the community, like the vaccine, if you are going to look at generally the community, they need to understand exactly what will be the benefit. Thank you. My time is up, I think.
Thank you.
Yes, I have to say, I'm so impressed that your team was able to get through all of that in that brief amount of time. But I think it speaks to your experience level. And, you know, I recognize that a lot of your team members have been involved in clinical trials for so long that, you know, this stuff just, you know the steps and the processes. So it was helpful to see your list and let everyone also share that and kind of learn from that. So we'll move along. Our group was group 2, and I will share screen for just a minute. And Jimena and Jaime are going to briefly run through what our group came up with. I will tell you in advance that this is a much shorter list because we did a lot of talking and giving examples of why these items are important and how things can kind of go wrong sometimes if you don't think about them. So Jimena, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, the first we noticed that we need to do is to announce everybody that we have a new NOA and let the team know. Then to review that if the faculty members or there are key personnel or and confirm their ability for the effort, and then revise the budget, then start the process for the subcontracts with the Vanderbilt University, turn all the terms of the subcontract to the legal office of the institution, and then see if human resources manager to complete all the equipment of the project, and then to revise the budget of supplies or procurement. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Jimena. Short and sweet, but again, we had really great conversation in the process, and I appreciate all the contributions. Hillary, do you want to share screen or?
Yeah. Where'd it go? Here we go. We also had a lot of discussion about why Gantt charts are important and how they help get the team organized, and that there's a lot of things that you need to consider before you can even make the Gantt chart itself. Does someone, I think maybe either Betty or Sambiri, does one of you want to report out for our group? Anybody? Otherwise, I can give a quick overview. So we said we need to determine the project timeline, if there are any reporting requirements that we need to be aware of during the grant period that will help figure out the timeline for the Gantt chart. Discuss the requirements of the funder to help determine which tasks we want to prioritize. And then, like we said, we'll create a list of tasks before we put the Gantt chart together. And the Gantt chart will provide visibility for project tasks and help to allocate resources accordingly. And we want to make sure that the team has a way to share project resources to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And then here were our task list items to go into our Gantt chart. Similar to what you guys have said, though, like I said, group one's list, wow, very impressed. First, we want to review the budget to determine the funding for personnel, for supplies, if anything needs to get purchased. We'll set an initial meeting to review grant goals, the statement of work, and just get this team all on one page. We'll need to recruit the study coordinator for the project because that person needs to be hired, and then review the effort budgeted for the faculty member and the grant administrator and see if any changes need to be made to their existing effort, and if necessary, seek prior approval in order to make those changes. But if not, send the effort allocations to your finance and HR teams. We'll involve legal to begin the process of the subcontract. And then we talked about what is the target population for the project recruitment, thinking about the number of participants, and that'll help you determine the timeline for how many you should recruit within a week or a month. And then which community is that recruitment occurring? This may affect your timeline if you need to set up some engagement meetings with community members, etc. And yeah, that was pretty much our discussion.
Thank you all so much, everyone, for participating in that exercise. I did see in the chat where it was asked to share a copy of the master list from group one, and we can certainly do that and share that out with everyone, just so that you have it as a helpful tool of things to consider for project, initiation, so to speak. So I am going to jump back into the presentation. I think I am. Are you seeing my presentation at the moment?
Yep.
You are. Maybe I need to close a few windows. Sorry, just a moment.
Online project management tools is what it says.
Yeah, that's what it's supposed to say. Just need to there. I just had to switch my windows to see it on my screen. Okay, so it could be that your team operates just fine using a Gantt chart or some other written system to guide and monitor your projects. But some teams find these static goals a little cumbersome to keep current with what is happening on a project. And over the years, there have been so many online project management tools created to help keep up with the day-to-day tracking of a project. I do recognize that for some folks, internet access is a big hurdle that may make some online tools less effective for project tracking. But I also know that others are already exploring this realm and using it in their day-to-day practices. So I just wanted to review a few of the options that are out there. You may recognize this slide from the GAIN pre-award sessions. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the Microsoft Office suite, which has its own set of tools to sort of help track things. Obviously using email and Box and just organizing your files can be one way of managing a project. I've linked here several free options that might be helpful. The Google suite of Gmail and Google Drive and Google Documents that is out there. Advantages to that is that it's free, but also the updating of these documents is sort of universal for everyone that has access. So you don't get into the version control that can sometimes be an issue if everyone is just emailing a document with a file as an attachment, like just updating a spreadsheet. That can get cumbersome if different people are making different updates, you know? So that's an advantage to software like Google that can make updates in real time. And then two others that are very similar are Asana that I've linked here. And I've also linked a brief demo video if anyone wants to watch that in their own time. I had actually asked that folks watch the Asana one before the session. So I hope some of you were able to do that. Trello is another free online software for project tracking. It's very similar. Our team at Vanderbilt just happens to use Asana. So that's the demo that I'll be doing today. But in practice, they are pretty similar. And then I did just receive some feedback from one of the participants in the pre-award GAIN training that they use Grant Vantage. It is specific to grant management, but it's also commercial software. So there are some costs involved, but I've linked it here in case anyone, wants to check that out. Let me just make sure we still have time. Okay, I think we're still good on time. So I'm going to just take you very quickly through Asana so that you can see it. And then if you want to create a free account in your own time and kind of play around, maybe you'll be a little more comfortable doing that. So I'm going to try just clicking on this link and see if the screen sharing, I've shared the window, so I'm hoping that it will just open, but let me know if that doesn't happen. I've got it pulled up on my computer as well. So kind of just spiraling on my end, but let's see what it does. So is it opening for you all, or are you still seeing the presentation?
No, still the presentation.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing and I'll just open it, like go to that screen. Bear with me just a second. All right, so this is Asana for all intents and purposes. So I'm just going to talk through a few sections because I understand that this is kind of busy, and there are a lot of toolbars and things going on, and that can be intimidating. So you see all of these trees here in the background. That's something that I just added. They have a ton of backgrounds that you can choose from. Some people just choose to keep it black. I liked the trees because it improved my mood every day. So, that part I did myself. And then I'm going to talk you through some of these toolbars. And so, okay. So on the left-hand side here, you have a lot of different options. So there's a home screen for like your Asana account. And I'll go through, so I'll click on some of these in just a moment. This My Tasks section right here, I have found to be the most helpful that I use every single day. I'll get there. You can send messages to each other here. I don't use these aspects so much. And then you get into all of the different teams that you have. And so I have so many teams in here for every grant that I'm managing. And so, we have chosen to separate out every objective of every grant as its own team so that different people can be involved and we can make sure that we're tracking all the objectives of our grants. But other people might choose, I know I'm scrolling really quickly, but because I want to get back down to the GAIN team. Other people typically use this where for a project, you would create a team and then invite the members to join it. So this is our GAIN team, and I've invited the other two directors. This is Hillary Vansell. She doesn't have her photo in here just yet. And Holly Castle. So that's our team. And then if you click on the, I'll go back to the board view. If you click on the project, you can see the title here, GAIN Post-Award Training. this toolbar across here is really just affecting the view of how you see the information. And you can set what this looks like for yourself, and it doesn't affect how other team members see it, because the reasoning behind this for Asana and Trello is similar, is that they acknowledge that different people like to see information in different ways. So I prefer this board view. So you see its board is selected here. So that gives me 3 columns. This is my to-do column for this project. This is my in progress column. So all the tasks that have been added would flow here that I've started on, I'm in progress. And then this is the completed column that kind of serves as an archive for everything that's been done on the project. And so I'll talk you through a few of these, and I'll start some tasks, that kind of thing. So one thing when I'm looking on here that I left on here intentionally is that I've noticed that under my to-do list is this item, provide feedback on draft slides for today's session. And that already happened. You see it's red because it was due yesterday. So if I click on it, it opens up that task and you can see all the further details. So this project here, gain post-award training, under my to-do, this task was under the to-do column. I'm going to update it to completed because I already did it. And did you see how it moved from the to-do column to the completed? And then I mark it complete. And when I go back, you see it's ghosted out because it's done and it's in the archive because I already provided feedback on those slides. So I'll just show you. You can also physically click on a task and just move it to in progress. You know, you can do it. There's a lot of ways to do the same thing in this program, I feel like. And so it's really kind of just finding the way that you like to do it. So I'll just add a task to demonstrate what that looks like. And so I'll give myself a task of drafting gain part 2 certificates. If you click right here, you see it's ghosted out because it hasn't been assigned to anyone and there's no due date. I'm going to click here and then it lets me choose who from the team do I want to assign it to. So I'm going to assign it to myself. And then if you click on the add due date, I'm going to tell myself today. And then it could be as easy as that. But if you click on it and open it up, there's so many options of like adding a descriptive, you know, a description for it. Let's say there's a team member that doesn't really know much about this task. I'm just going to put work with to finalize certificates for all game. And so then as soon as you type, it's updated onto that task. And then it keeps a trail of like who has looked at the task. I can add collaborators. So I'm going to add in Ollie and Hillary. So now they will see all the updates on that task as well. And then there's a communication chain here where I can say, need to confirm names. And when I send that, it will send an email to Holly and Hillary saying, you know, Anne Green updated this task with a comment, you know, so it's all kind of connected. And I feel like you can keep it as simple or like involved as you want. I'll kind of stop there for this board view, but I want to just show you a few other quick things before we move on. So I said that you can affect the way you're seeing the information. So if I click on list, you see how everything changes and it gives you a list for your to do, a list of the progress. And you're basically, it's the same information. You're just seeing it in a different way. There are timeline options and calendar options for if you want to pay for your account, but these are the views for the free account. And then an overview is an opportunity to give an overview of the project itself. And so, you know, this is where you can just tell more about the project. You can link to the notice of award, you know, that kind of stuff. So I'll just go back to the view that I like. So mine usually looks like this from a day to day. But this aspect that I mentioned earlier, this my tasks, I want to show you because I know it's hard for a lot of people to transition to start using an online tracking system. For me personally, I didn't start using it every day until I put everything in it. So all the projects, and I have a personal section that nobody else sees but me, where I even put like my personal life stuff in it to just, this is where I go every day. And what I can do is click on my tasks and it summarizes everything from every single project that's for you with the due date and lists the project there. So for me, this is a helpful just running to-do list of all of the things, that need to get done. And I find that this view to be most helpful. And then from project to project, you might go in and add tasks within the project, but that my tasks, I find the most helpful. So I'll stop there. I don't know if anyone has any specific questions about Asana at the moment, but I'm available if anybody wants to talk about it more. I do encourage you to just play around in it, see if you think it would be helpful for you and your team. And if not, that's totally fine too. I see a few hands raised. Daphne?
Thanks, Anne. So is it possible to use Asana across different organizations? So let's say we want to collaborate with you guys on something.
Yes.
Because that is often a problem with Microsoft applications. When you're not on the same domain or whatever the technical thing behind it is, I don't know.
Yeah.
But is it possible to have in a team in Asana to have people with from different organizations?
Yes, I've not had a problem with that. So long as there is an email address, it's basically just linking to the Asana account. So long as that person has the account, then there's not really any issues there. And another feature I forgot to mention for my Mozambican and Brazilian colleagues out there, you can change languages on it. And so we can have it in Portuguese and everything is in Portuguese, and we just make our tasks, we write them in Portuguese as well. So so there are options, but to your question, Daphne, I've not encountered, I don't want to, it's I don't think there is an issue. I haven't encountered a problem with adding in folks from other institutions so far. But if you do encounter one, let me know, because I'd just be curious. We are still at a point of, we mostly just use this for ourselves internally, and we're starting to add in some colleagues, but we haven't brought in the UEM team, for example, and so I'd be interested to hear how everyone's experience goes that might try to use this. Any other questions before we proceed with kind of wrapping things up? And if you come up with questions as you get into it, feel free to just reach out, and I'm happy to help kind of, troubleshoot together. So let me just get back into the presentation. Okay. So in addition to all of the online project management tools that I mentioned, as you all know, there are myriad options available for just managing team communication, from your email inbox to mobile phones, WhatsApp, Skype, Slack, Zoom, all the other areas, including social media, that can be a bit crazy making. So I think it's always a good idea to check in with your team members, especially those in other countries and time zones, and confirm how they prefer to communicate and when they prefer to communicate. Circling back to the topic of cross-cultural communication that we covered in the pre-award session, it's really important to be honest about what works best for your team. Even if something isn't working for your team, don't hesitate to recommend alternatives that might be better suited for your local organization, you know? So with that, we'll just wrap things up. In this module, we've covered quite an array of topics today. Well, in this session, I should say. I invite you each to sit and consider them further and come back to us with any questions for the group. We covered key proposal elements that aid project tracking, indicators, Gantt chart review, and our exercise. We're going to get that helpful list from Team 1, and briefly touched on online project tracking for project implementation. So with that said, we've got about 10 minutes left and can answer any questions about any session that was included today, any module, or from any of the classes so far. I know this was sort of seen as our last session. We are going to have one more session next Tuesday. I'm going to go through some training slides in terms of like setting up your own training at your institution. And then we will be having a graduation wrap up for the course where everyone will have an opportunity to reintroduce themselves, share a bit about their experience, questions about the GAIN session, you know, all of that. And I will just go ahead and say that there will be an evaluation that will be emailed to everyone. And once you complete that evaluation, we will have certificates for you once you complete that. So maybe I'll pause there and then just give everyone a chance to ask any questions, again, about not just what we've covered today, but just anything, you know, that you might want to chat about. And feel free to type your question out in the chat too, if that's easier.
Sabiri says she wants to meet with you to go over more project tracking.
Yeah, absolutely, Sabiri. We can get together and either just you and I, or we can plan something a little more involved with others from KGH if you want. So we can talk about that. Actually, we have a call this afternoon, so we'll talk about it then. Okay, well, while we're waiting to see if any burning questions arise, Holly, did you have anything else to share in relation to next week and sort of the wrap up portion?
No, you know, you talked about the survey that we'll send out. It's a repeat of the survey that you took before class started. It's just to show, you know, if you gain some knowledge and skills. And then it also asks some questions to get some input from you all about what you liked, what you didn't like, what might have been missing, and so on and so forth. So that information is really helpful for us as we enhance programs. Unfortunately, I won't be at the next session. I'll be traveling to Zambia and South Africa, so I won't be there. So I'll just take this opportunity to thank you all for your time and your participation and your insight. Anne and Hillary and I are always here to provide technical assistance and support to you as you start to think through and develop your training programs for your organization. And we're just really thrilled to have you. And this was a lot of fun. Hillary.
Sorry, trying to find mute. Yeah, thank you guys so much for participating and all of your input throughout the course. It's been awesome. And as Holly mentioned, we're always available. My Casanet investigators, you know where to find me. I'm sure I send you more emails than you want. And I unfortunately also will not be able to attend next week, but Anne will lead the final session.
I know,
and
I'm like,
thank
don't
you.
feel like you don't, need to be there, because I will be there, and you're gonna have a fun time with Hillary and Holly. And it really is just another opportunity to chat and dive a little deeper into the things that we've covered. And I will be presenting on, the steps for setting up your own, and that kind of stuff. And just as Hillary was saying, some of you, I've already seen it coming up in the chat, as you kind of sit with these materials, we're all here, the whole network, is here to dive deeper, and we can help create additional trainings or sessions. This is what that evaluation is really meant to help capture, is like, what do you want to hear more on? How do you want to use this network going forward? And, we hope to just keep this going where we're all just learning from each other, the whole time.
Yeah, one thing I think we need to emphasize as we are closing for next week is our sustainability plans and challenges. That action will keep us really together. I will want to suggest, even if there is no training, we can have a monthly meeting or bi-weekly meeting to just generally discuss challenges in our areas in relation to our work. And then what you, the mentors, we need to remind us to do. I think with that, we can be on the track to our sustainability, and then mentoring also others that we have trained in our own areas to keep in line with the game plan.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that is a great idea, and I've seen that type of structure work. I know that the Red Cap Africa team has a monthly call where it's really sort of troubleshooting. And so folks can submit a problem that then gets focused on the monthly call, and anyone can tune in and just sort of listen in as they talk through the issue and work through, what needs to happen. And so it could be, I could see it being something like that. We can definitely keep talking about it, but I appreciate the thought and the idea. Okay, well, we're right on time. We've got about 2 minutes left. I don't know if there are any outstanding questions, but otherwise we can let you get on with the rest of your day, and I will happily see you all, hopefully all of you, next week as we wrap things up.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for everything. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.